It is a real pleasure to welcome the International Visitor Program of Department of State. And I think that one of the things that we were talking about in our reception before the talk was the fact that oceanography is so international because it's so global. In fact, in oceanography, we only talk about one ocean. We don't say the oceans, it's the ocean, because it's all interconnected. And although we draw pretty lines on it for EEZs and other features, the ocean doesn't pay attention to those. And the organisms in the ocean don't pay attention to it. So it's really important that we work together internationally. And this group is very interested in conservation, in issues of the sustainability of the ocean. And it's very appropriate then that our speaker is Octavio Alberto. This remarkable scientist here at Scripps came to us from Mexico. He has touched so many areas related to conservation and has also made it very much a part of his life to connect that research with what's happening on the ground, on real conservation. So he heads an important program that's related to the Gulf of California. He's been involved with conservation efforts around that very endangered marine mammal, the vaquita. He has had a very personal involvement and relationship with the development of conservation initiatives at Cabo Pulmo. Many of you are familiar with that area, and the fact that the community there decided to embrace conservation, tourism, and sustainability, and now has a more vibrant economy than it did when it was solely based on fishing. And today he's going, and also those of you who are familiar with the aquarium know that he's responsible for the remarkable photography around to your left and in the gallery to your right. He's an amazing photographer as well as an amazing scientist, an amazing conservation leader. And he's going to talk to us about yet another one of his interests today, mangroves, the skin of our coasts. Octavio.
Well, thank you very much, Margaret. The Scripps Institution of Oceanography, the aquarium, with all the team that has been supporting me from many, many years ago. And I will show you some of these pictures. Also, our guests from many, many parts of the world, and of course, all of you that are here to hear something about this special environment. So I had a big challenge because probably many of you have seen many of these photographies. So last week I was looking at my portfolio of images, trying to find some of the images that probably you haven't seen, like this one that I took 17 years ago. It's a mangrove, a very special mangrove in Baja California. It's a small lagoon. You will see other images, but I was trying to show my family, because in that time I traveled a lot to see my parents. What are the importance of mangrove? You can see that they basically grow in the interface between the ocean and the land, and they form this amazing barrier that protect us. And this is another perspective of the same protection or the same service that mangroves provide to humans, to us. And that is the reason why I have been calling it the skin of our coast, because in the same way that our skin protects us to many nature um, things. Mangroves protect coastal areas for erosions or against the erosion, against hurricanes, and they provide many things for us. And so I will show you to you many of these ecosystem services. Now, 17 years later, let me go back, and that image that you saw was taken with an ultralight. So basically, it's these small planes that only the pilot and me were there, and I had to carry 2 cameras with me and take the pictures. Now, 17 years later, with drones, with the drone technology, you can use these very amazing devices, very incredible cameras. This is another lagoon, very small lagoon. Zacatecas is this mangrove lagoon. La Paz City is over there, also in Baja. I used to go every month. It's very easy to go there and sample inside this lagoon. We were collecting fish to study them. But again, 17 years later, we can do this amazing work with mangroves, and I will show you at the end of my presentation some of the ideas that how we are using these new technologies to understand and also to preserve these ecosystems. So let me go back to my presentation, and it's very interesting because mangroves are only 50 species all around the world. In Mexico, we only have 3 species. This one is the red mangrove. And this image that it's here, you can see how big this species it is when they have a freshwater input. So this is a picture taken in Chiapas in a very big lagoon, and these trees, the red mangroves, constantly have these freshwater inputs. But the same species in Baja, where it's very dry, they only reach 2 meters, 3 meters. And this is the northernmost distribution of the red mangroves, and you can see the plasticity, the flexibility that these species have to adapt to this, to the environment's conditions. So if you ask me what is the most important thing, or why you have been studying mangroves, well, one of the reasons is this one. Mangroves start growing, you can see the seed. The seed start growing even before it detaches from the mother tree. So this is basically a juvenile tree, and they are just waiting for the right conditions, like this upside down missile, to go directly to the bottom and basically start a new plant. And you just need one of these trees to start generating these ecosystems. If they don't find the right conditions at the moment they go down, they can drift for a couple of months. And again, just when they find conditions in rocky habitats or in muddy conditions, they will start growing. And 100 years later, you can see something like this, complete ecosystems. And you just need very few of these trees to basically finish with these amazing ecosystems. Also, you can see that they form these calm waters. When they separate the ocean and the land, most of the time they form these lagoons. And many mirrors could be very jealous about the reflections that they can produce. This is an upside down image of the reflection of the entire forest. And this is one of the reasons why many species use these ecosystems to live or to go there during part time of their life cycle, like birds or fish. And many species that probably you have eaten, snappers, grunts, blue crabs, shrimps, they use mangroves to survive, especially when they are juvenile. I'm gonna tell you more about this, but probably this is the reason why mangroves have been called the top of the nursery habitats in many places around the world. In the same way that kelp forest does it for regions like here in California, mangroves do it in other parts of the world, especially in tropical areas. So once these fish grow, or once these species leave these nursery areas, they go offshore, and it's there where humans receive all the benefits of the mangroves, because we fish whatever survived or was exported from the mangroves, and we have many fisheries in areas like, for example, the Gulf of California. 30% of the fisheries are related with mangrove areas. So this is what the reason, or one of the most important reasons why mangroves are important. So when I was young, 17 years ago, well, actually a little, 15 years ago, I came here to study my PhD, and my PhD was related with nursery habitats, and one of the nursery habitats were mangroves. So together with my colleagues Jose, Tomas, and Isaí, they were studying in the university in La Paz. We decided to form this team to study these different mangroves along Baja California Peninsula. So we started in La Paz, here in the bottom of the map, and we decided to do this journey, these expeditions to study these different coastal lagoons. And we did it in a very tough way. Well, actually it was very funny. We used this small boat, and everything that you saw in the pictures here, our tents and coolers and everything, had to be compact, because we only had this boat. The four of us and the captain, we traveled all the way from La Paz to Santa Rosalia in the middle of the peninsula, and visit all these beautiful lagoons. So it was very amazing, 1 month traveling and counting and doing estimations of this, everything that live inside these lagoons. And sometimes we had to fight with the tide, with the low tide, but sometimes in the high tide, it's very spectacular. So what we did is to visit these different lagoons. Some of them are more rocky, some others are more sandy, and you will see what is the main difference. But you can see inside the roots of these red mangroves, because they are very shallow, the visibility is enough to count all the small fish or the juvenile fish that live inside. And we put more attention in one of the most important commercial species in the region. It's the yellow snapper, and basically we counted all these animals. And the first message that I want to share with you tonight, and this is a very boring slide, but it's important because you can see that we have the science, and also it's important because these two graphs represent, or the message is that when you have more mangroves, we found more yellow snappers. You can see that the trend is positive and it's always increasing. And this is important because having more mangroves in this case in the Gulf of California, in the Baja California Peninsula, represent more habitat for these species. And then we calculated how much or how many of these animals go to the offshore reefs. And we did it in 2007, and this is the total amount of yellow snappers that were exported between all these 50, 51, 54 small lagoons. And we did the same in 2009, and we counted much more yellow snappers. So again, this is important because more area, more mangrove, more suitable habitat for these species represent more of these species. And the other important thing is that we went outside, we went offshore, and we sampled in all the different habitats that the subadults or the adult animals live. And this, again, this is very boring, but if you see here, these animals have moved between the different habitats that they found. So at the end, this is the science. So we generate all this science and we summarize our findings in drawings or in infographics like this. That basically is the life cycle of the species. The yellow snapper starts as larvae in the open water. In some way they found the mangrove habitats. They live there for 1 year, 1 year and a half, and they move to shallow rocky reefs and they go to the deep rocky reefs. And all this life cycle, the second message that I want to share with you tonight is that this life cycle needs a minimum of 4 years to be completed. So this is very important because sometimes we destroy something like a house or a hotel or a shrimp farm, destroy the mangrove in a coastal area, and we won't see any changes in the fishery or in the adult population until 4 years later. And by then, as humans, we forget very easily, and by then we start wondering what's happening, why we have less snappers, and nobody will remember that actually the problem happened 4 years before. So this is very, very important. So the second thing that we did is that if this is happening for one species, the yellow snapper, maybe will happen for many other species. So what we did in this new research that was, again, part of my thesis, is that we put together 2 databases. Landings of all the species that are connected with mangroves and the amount of mangrove that we have in the Gulf of California. And this is what we found. If you have more mangrove area, you have more landings. Yes? First, we showed that if we have more mangrove area, we have more abundance of one species. Second, we demonstrated that if you have more mangrove, you have more landings. But the nice thing about this is that now we can convert these landings into money because people like us go to the market and pay for these landings. Yes? We don't necessarily pay to go and see these tiny animals inside the mangrove, but we pay when they are in the market. So something that we found is that, something very important that we found is that all the mangroves in the Gulf of California produce like $20 million every year for fishing communities in the region. And in a per unit of area basis, we found that just 1 hectare of mangrove produced $500,000 per year just in fishery products, just in fish and snappers, and just having the mangroves there. Just in a natural conditions, this is the benefits that we receive every year. Now, what happened in Mexico, in the Gulf of California, as happened in many places, is that there are many other economic activities that are fighting against having a natural environment and or needs to compete these natural conditions with other economy. This is a development in La Paz, but there are many other economic activities that are competing with mangroves. So the problem is that, again, is not only the problem losing a hectare of mangrove today, it's also how much money we lost or we will lose in the future, especially for other generations. So for us right now is $500,000, but for future generation it could reach up to $1 million because this income, these revenues won't be produced anymore once we destroy these mangroves. And this is one of the problems because we as humans, we don't connect these problems in a time series or in a time frame. Now, I finished my PhD finally, and I started working with other colleagues, and I started working with other students, and we wonder if fish connect in the same way, in that way with mangroves. Probably other species connect with mangroves in the same way, but probably in larger scales. So my thesis was about a regional situation. Basically, I studied only the services of fisheries for the economic activities in the Gulf of California, but what happened with other species like geese and ducks that travel from Alaska all the way to the Gulf of California to spend their wintering time or their winters here in these lagoons, but in their way back or when they go there is a huge industry, a hunting industry. In Mexico there is a hunting industry, but it's not, cannot be compared with the US and the Canada hunting industry, that it's very, very huge and also represent a lot of money. So we basically departed from the same hypothesis because the life cycle of this species is basically the same like a fish, but in a larger scale. So we performed the same analysis. This is boring, and actually there is one colleague, one of the co-authors of this paper that has explained me the theory behind this analysis many, many times. But for me, this is what represents. If you have larger coastal lagoons and if you have more mangroves, you have more birds migrating. So many of these lagoons support more migratory birds just because there is more habitat and there is more healthy habitats, because many of the productions, many of the primary productivity that is related with mangroves is basically the food for many of these species. And of course, if you have more birds migrating, in the way back or in this transition, you will have more hunting activity. So the summary of this study is that for every square kilometer of coastal lagoon in Mexico, there are around $1,800 produced in the U.S. hunting industry. Only in the dog stamp sales here in the U.S. But when you put together all the money that these sales represent, it's around $4 million every year. And if you multiply this money by the expenditures that the hunters spend within this industry, it could be you can multiply it, or we can multiply this number by a factor up to 20 times. So it's a huge money that represent this cycle, and it's, I mean, I can tell you many things about how we can preserve these ecosystem services, but for sure, there should be more connections between countries, and this is the reason why diplomacy is very important, because you can see that the ecosystem services are beyond, or the benefits, the economic benefits are beyond national borders. So again, 1 hectare of mangrove represent ecosystem services for fisheries, for water purification, for biodiversity, for erosion control, for hurricane protection, for carbon sequestration, many, many ecosystem services. Maybe right now we are receiving these benefits in some way. And actually, let me talk more about carbon sequestration. As Margaret mentioned, right now there is a lot of efforts talking about what oceans, what the coastal ecosystems represent for climate change. And mangroves are one of the most important ecosystems that can help us fighting this climate change, because they sequester a lot of carbon. They produce a lot of biomass, and then you can see here the net of roots that trap all these biomass, all these productions, and sometimes with the help of other tiny animals like this crab, you bring all this biomass below ground, and is there where many, many things happens. Actually, this is, I mentioned Jose at the beginning 17 years ago, and we are still working together. Now there are other members of the team that we collaborate in this research, Ismael and Matt Costa, that I think is here. It's over there. He's a student here at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and he is studying how mangroves are sequestering these carbons. And they use this course to go very deep inside the ground and collect these samples. And after different things that they need to do, they collect these samples in many areas. Also, there are different conditions. I have very funny videos about Matt trying to do this, but it's very, very important because they bring these samples here, and together with the help of other students, they dry the samples, they analyze the content of these samples, and in doing that, we have been understanding many important things. Like, for example, if you go down in the mud or in these sediments, just going 1 meter deep is like traveling in time back to 1,000 years ago. And we have found that some of these very, very tiny lagoons in Baja have been growing on top of themselves for 2,000, 3,000, even 5,000 years ago. So something that we haven't done, again, humans, these connections in time, is that it's not only about how much they are sequestering right now. Is that imagine a lagoon that has been growing for 2 millennia, and how much carbon is below ground under all these sediments. So this is the important part, because these tiny mangroves maybe are not as impressed like the ones that I showed you at the beginning of my presentation, but these tiny ones have been growing on top of themselves for all this time, and they have accumulated a lot of mangrove. Actually, the estimation is that they only represent 1% of the coverage in Northwest Mexico, only 1%, but they have around 30% of all the carbon that is sequestered in the northwest Mexico. So it's huge. So now you can understand why scientists have put all these numbers for each of these services. And if you add all of them, and here is only one sample, a sample of all these ecosystem services, but if you add all the values that these services have, you can reach a value, a total value, just for 1 hectare, 100 by 100 meters, around $200,000 per year. So this is very, very important. And I don't think, or it will be very difficult to find economic activity that now, if you put it in perspective, will compete with mangroves. But again, humans are doing this, we are doing this, and it's a challenge because, of course, we need to grow. There are many, many things that we need to have in order to maintain our families, our communities. But also, it's very challenge. It's a very huge challenge to do it. So let me finish with bad news right now, but I'm going to start talking about good news. This is the last thing that we are evaluating, how dams in rivers are impacting mangroves. And this is one of the most important lagoons in the Gulf of California. Is Marismas Nacionales. It's the largest one in the Gulf of California. And what we did is to compare this lagoon, that the main river that feeds this lagoon is the last river in Mexico that doesn't have dams. So what we did is to compare this river, that is the San Pedro Mezquital River, with other 3 rivers, and we evaluate what is happening in the mouth of these rivers. So El Fuerte was dammed in 1956, Santiago was dammed in 1994, and there is the Acaponeta that doesn't have a barrier in the main flow of the river, but it has some tributaries that are basically changing the river. So these are satellite images. The red is all the shoreline that has been lost by erosion, and the blue is the sediments that have been accumulated since 1975. So basically you can see that when you don't have a dam, you gain a shoreline. When you have a dam, you lost the shoreline. So basically Fuerte and Santiago in the mouth of the rivers have suffered a huge changes. And this is with satellite images, but you can go now with Google Earth. Anyone can go and check what we did, because we went to and used Google Earth, and you can see El Fuerte, an image of February 13, 2004, and an image of 31st March 2015. Only 11 years later, you can see how much erosion has happened in El Fuerte, in that mouth. But the San Pedro Mezquital is still growing. It's blue. So this is some of the things that we have been seeing, and it's kind of scary, because if you see El Fuerte, everything that has been lost is mangroves. We went there and we did a transect in that mouth of the rivers. The A is the San Pedro Mezquital River. It has everything from the beach all the way to the mangrove forest. But in El Fuerte, you can see that you only see dead trees. And right now, the waves are hitting the beach, but because there is no more sediments, basically the ocean is gaining terrain and basically destroying everything over there. So let me finish with some ideas about the big picture. I think the most important thing right now, well, in the morning somebody asked me, Octavio, and do you think this evaluating these ecosystem services have a repercussion, especially with politicians, with decision makers, or to change the law? And my short answer is yes, but needs to be done together with a huge effort of science communication efforts. It cannot happen, unfortunately, just by publishing a paper and expect that politicians will read it and will understand it and then make a different laws. So we connect these publications with huge communication efforts like the ones that you see here, and then the newspapers start talking about. This is in Spanish, but something like the government of Mexico is underestimating the value of mangroves. And once the topic reaches the newspapers, there are many things that happen. It seems that people over there start working or start putting efforts in changing the situations. So the other thing that I think needs to happen is how scientists or science could be translated in a language that probably more people can understand what we are trying to say with all these graphs, with all these publications. So we have created initiatives like this one. You can check Datamares website, datamares.ucsd.edu, where there are stories about these publications that I just show it to you, but the language and the way that it's in the way that they are written, it's completely different. But we maintain the robustness in the scientific results. So I think more people can read it. And actually something very nice is that if you click in this infographic, you can interact with the data. So this is, again, Matt's samples. Each of these circles are the samples that he has brought from many parts of the Gulf of California, and you can click in each of these ones. You will see how deep the sample went, also how much carbon each of these samples has, and also the lagoon where the sample was extracted. So people can interact with the data, and also they can read these texts in a more digested way, like, for example, how much carbon is packed into mangrove moss. And you can read it, and I hope that it's more easily to read. So the other thing that I think needs to happen is how we can bring the technology to anyone to use it, and also and very important, in real time, because I can come every year or every 2 years to give you a lecture, but in 2 years we will lose more mangrove areas. So it's very, very important to bring technology faster and see how decision makers, how the general public can interact and see these things that are happening. This is another project that we are involved. I think Astrid, Rachel, and other members of our team are here, and they have been helping me proposing new ways to see how public understand what is happening. This is Playa del Carmen. It's in the Yucatan Peninsula, and this is a new platform that Google Earth has. It's called Google Engine. And basically, we have been trying to generate these time lapses to show you. This is 1984, and we will go all the way to 2016. And look at how small is this. Everything there is mangrove, and this is what has been happening in the mangroves. And we need to have this technology, these tools, in real time for decision makers, because mangroves, especially mangroves, are suffering a deforestation that is very, very difficult to follow or to perceive, because it doesn't happen very fast. It's happened very, very slowly, and again, but the impact, it's very, 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 very hard. So in a period of 30 years, you can see how much mangroves we have lost in that period of time. And finally, I think, and this is, I put this map, here is Playa del Carmen, very close to Cancun. Cancun has lost a lot of mangroves as well. So we need to start using the technology in that way. And finally, we need to tell stories, because it's not about me coming here and you hearing what I'm saying about the problems. It's about people facing these challenges in real time and on the ground. So I think it's very important to tell stories like Humberto and his uncle Abel. They live in this tiny island that is called La Concepcion Island, inside a huge marine park, a national park in Mexico, La Encrucijada. And it's one of the stories that is here in the exhibition. What they have decided is to preserve their island. This national park is suffering. You can see here. Let me see here. This is a huge palm oil agriculture to basically produce biofuel, and many of these other economic activities are basically competing with what is happening in La Encrucijada. They live here, basically in the heart of the entire forest, and what they have, they decided to protect that area, and they don't want to sell their land, their area. The family basically live in a very rural conditions, and they want to maintain or preserve this area and invite bird watchers to basically generate the income that they need to survive. But the other things that they have been doing is that they protect the area, and also during spring, they patrol the area. Here is Abel patrolling the area, and they are looking for something very important, that are the nests of American crocodiles. And what they do is, when these crocodiles hatch, they collect them and they keep them for 1 month or 2 months. Why they are doing this? Because since 20 or 30 years ago, basically the crocodiles were over-hunted in the entire lagoon, and almost basically extinct from the area. So they have been doing this because keeping them for 1 month or 2 months, they increase the survivorship of this species. And in the same way that sharks help coral reefs to be healthy or healthier, crocodiles are very important to maintain the populations of many, many species in these lagoons. So once they have 2 months, they release them, and by doing this for the last 10 years, they have increased the populations of these animals by 200-300%. So right now, there are more birds, there are more productivity, there are many, many things that are the results of the coming back of the predators. Actually, this is publications by a former professor here at Scripps, Jeremy Jackson, and this is a food web of an estuary when people have overfished everything, and this is the food web of an estuary without people. And you can see that crocodiles, seals, sharks, and whales used to be the most important top predators or megafauna in these areas. So I think in the same way that Cabo Pumo, Margaret mentioned about this family in Cabo Pumo and how they recover the area, well, there are other examples that they are trying to do that. So for me, telling stories should be also one of the most important things that we need to do in order to attract the attention of the public. This is Chinchorro Atoll, and there is a small lagoon here, and it's very pristine, and it's one of the few areas where you can approach to the fauna, and because they don't see humans, or they see humans very rare, you can approach to the fauna, and it's one of the few places where you can snorkel and dive with the same species, the American crocodile. So you can approach, you can see the picture here. And, but again, now that there is a tourist activity that is generating more income than the income that you can produce hunting these animals. And maybe we just need to reach a balance. It's not one or the other. We just need to reach a balance. And in 2014, I was able to visit the Galapagos Islands. It's very, very harsh to live there, and especially for mangroves, but we were able to visit 54 small lagoons in Galapagos, and what we found was something very important, because probably in some of these lagoons, some of these lagoons are completely pristine. We were the first humans visiting these lagoons, and you can see the amount of fauna, amount of biodiversity that you can see. These were the guardians of these lagoons, but once you are inside of these protected areas, you can see, right away you can see the amount of productivity that they have. And of course, as I show you in the diagram of the food web, sharks, when we don't overfish them, they are there as part of the mangrove lagoon. Sea turtles. In one time, we in that lagoon probably were, I don't know, 100 sea turtles, and everywhere you see the megafauna, because it's there are lagoons that are basically in pristine conditions. And the other group that was in the diagram is seals, in this case sea lions. This is the Galapagos sea lion, and they were very playful, and they spent a lot of time with us and helping us enjoying the view, but basically reminding us that this used to be the conditions in many of these areas. So just to finalize, this year I got this award from the Explorers Club and supported by the Rolex Foundation, and I'm basically use this award to try to do more outreach efforts about mangroves, because I hope that I convince you that they are very, very important. And the most, probably the silly part, let's put it in this way, is that if we put together the 8 countries, the cover or the mangrove area that we have in 8 countries, we can protect almost 70% of all the mangroves in this planet. And I think it's feasible to put together these efforts and convince the politicians and the presidents of these countries that these countries have a huge responsibility for the entire planet. And we are doing more and more outreach products using always science behind. We have these other initiatives that is called the natural numbers, and we have produced tiny videos of 3 minutes, and one of them is about mangroves. And last year we won this movie festival in the category of micro movies, and this category was sponsored by the AAAS, and we won the first place. You can go and see this video. It's only 3 minutes, and basically summarize what I have said in this entire presentation. So probably you go there, you will save a lot of time. And this is our campaign, Chasing Mangroves, and we will continue doing all these efforts this year and next year. Thank you.